Hello, my name is Donna Cox, and I am so happy to be here for the Pioneers Talk today. I am a professor in the School of Art and Design at the University of Illinois in Urbana-Champaign, and I am the director of the Advanced Visualization Lab at the National Center for Supercomputing Applications in Champaign, Urbana. I just want to thank you, Ed Kramer, and the SIGGRAPH Pioneers Committee for inviting me to share some of my views of history today. Many thanks to Pat Hanrahan, who introduced me to computer graphics when we were students at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. Pat also encouraged me to attend SIGGRAPH, and my first SIGGRAPH was 1984. Today, I'll share a lot of historical photos, including those of other SIGGRAPH pioneers. Many of these photos are taken from a recent book that I co-edited with Ellen Sandor and Janine Fraun called New Media Futures: The Rise of Women in the Digital Arts. We recover many, but not all, of the lost histories of Midwestern women in digital art, and thus we recover a lot of SIGGRAPH history. Here are many of the contributors at SIGGRAPH 2019, right after the Herstory panel. These are familiar women of SIGGRAPH, including Carolina Cruz, Claudia Hart, Donna Plepys, Barbara Sykes, Maxine Brown, Ellen Sandor, Copper Gilleth, Tiffany Holmes, Jane Veeder, Margaret Delinsky, who's hidden, and more. We missed Brenda Laurel and Joan Truckenbrod at SIGGRAPH.
Everybody,
one
smile. Yay!
The New Media Futures introduction provides the history of social change that set the stage for women and innovation. These are recovered histories of leaders who paved the way for women in technology. We establish context for the digital revolution and technological inventions. Midwestern universities invented programmable computing and contributed in major ways to the post-World War II innovation in science. Women's important contributions are now being recognized. It is little known that 60s women's movement began in Chicago with authors and activists like Betty Friedan. A group of women in Chicago published newsletters that catalyzed a movement across the country. The change was pivotal in many of our stories in New Media Futures. In the 70s, many seminal technologies were born in the Midwest. University of Illinois researchers invented Plato, online learning, early email, chat rooms, and other network communication that we now attribute to social media. Women artists explored these new inventions. The Electronic Visualization Lab at the University of Illinois at Chicago has played a key role. Tom DeFonte, Dan Sandine, and their students transitioned from analog to computer graphics during this era, and many of the students graduating from EVL have contributed to digital art and the early formation of SIGGRAPH. Ellen Sandor and Janine Fraun and I interviewed 23 women who tell their stories. This book has beautiful color plates of early analog and digital art. These contributions here that you see on the left, Jane Veeder's early gaming art, and Joan Truckenbrod's on the right. There are stories from Maxine Brown about SIGGRAPH and visual morphing artwork by Mary Rasmussen, and Midwestern Inspirations by Brenda Laurel. And Colleen Bushell tells her story of the history of data visualization and her design for the first visual browser, Mosaic, created at NCSA in her collaboration with Mark Andreessen. Ellen Sandor shares milestones of pioneering work from her collaborative Chicago lab, Art to the Nth, and Janine Franz, collaborative art, and her brilliant contributions to the writing of the introduction. This book is filled with beautiful imagery and personal stories. My story begins with humble beginnings and my inspiring family from where I grew up on a homestead farm in Oklahoma. And my story quickly leads to Pat's introduction to the Stanford Technology raster computer in the remote sensing department at the University of Wisconsin. Pat left the university before graduating to join New York Institute of Technology, so I studied his code and began writing C. I took Fortran classes as well as C to create 2D colorized portraitures using the STC. It cost $10 to scan a photograph on a densitometer in those days. No commercial scanner was available. I developed 2D imaging software to manipulate images before Dr. Halo or Photoshop. I algorithmically generated and segmented in imagery that I had created on the STC and then photographed with a tripod and camera on the monitor, printed segments in a darkroom, reassembled them into wall-size compilages. In 1985, I joined the University of Illinois as an assistant professor in photography and design. The interactive computer-assisted RGB editor, iCare, was published in the Small Computers in the Arts Conference. It was one of the software tools that I brought with me to Illinois. After arriving at the university campus in Illinois, I located Larry Smarr, who was establishing the National Center for Supercomputing Applications, one of the first NSF-funded supercomputing centers. I met with Smarr and convinced him that visually literate artists should work with scientists to visualize data. I captured these ideas in a Leonardo paper published 3 years later, using the supercomputer to visualize higher dimensions and artists' contribution to scientific visualization. In that paper, I defined Renaissance teams, interdisciplinary teams of artists and scientists solving visualization problems, and provided examples of different ways artists and scientists could, or artists and designers could visualize scientific data. I became an NCSA faculty affiliate and started organizing Renaissance teams at the genesis of the Supercomputer Center. I evangelized digital art and Renaissance teams. Soon after arriving, I introduced Smarr to members of the EVL, and this began a 3-decade collaboration. At first, Dan was resistant to the idea of a supercomputer. He said he didn't like any computer that was too big to throw. Recently, I found old Polaroids showing the assembly of the Cray 1 at the university. It was an engineering mess. Someone had placed a post-it bubble with Smarr watching the process thinking, God, I hope the damn thing works. It did work. Everybody had to have their beauty shot with the red Cray 1 supercomputer. Note the Mac 1 interface in the early days. I also had my beauty shot with the Cray, courtesy Kurt Fishback, artist-photographer. But most of the time in those days, the lion's share of the graphics works was done on a Silicon graphics workstation. I met Maxine Brown at a conference in 1986. And then at the SIGGRAPH 1986 conference, I introduced Larry Smarr, his first SIGGRAPH, and I introduced him to Maxine Brown and many other attendees. At the time, Digital Productions was using supercomputer for computing graphics movies. So Smarr attracted Craig Upson from Digital Productions and Nancy St. John from Robert Abel Associates, and convinced them to move to Champaign, Illinois, to build a visualization program. Craig and Nancy St. John established NCSA's first scientific visualization program. That's Nancy standing next to Stefan Fangmeyer on the left, Matt Arrett on the far left, Jeff Yost on the right. About the same time, Tom DeFonte attracted Maxine Brown to move to EVL in Chicago. The Midwest migration in the mid-'80s had impact. EVL and SIGGRAPH became an important part of the NCSA culture, and it generated a lot of funding opportunities. In 1985, I organized the first Renaissance team with math professor George Francis and computer science student Ray Adasic. We created 3D topological software to interactively explore these mathematical surfaces. I named the variations on a theme the Venus series, after the female shapes that emerged from the program. George, Ray, and I collaborated with Ellen Sandor at Art to the Nth Collaboratory and with Dan Sandine to create the first Venus series scholograms, an auto-stereo art form. We exhibited in art galleries in Chicago and New York. And in 1987, we exhibited the Venus series scholograms at the SIGGRAPH Art Show. My artist statement declared the importance of collaborative art and Renaissance teams. The first Venus scholograms at Art Show 86, here shown with Smarr, Sandine, Ellen Sandor, Ray Adasic, and DeFonte. A few months later, we gave presentations at the historic Simulations, Dissimulations Symposium at the Art Institute of Chicago, with featured speakers and philosophers such as Baudrillard, Pam McCordick, and pioneers such as the late Ed Emshwiller, Muriel Cooper, and Stephen Wilson. The second Renaissance team at NCSA was with astrophysicist Mike Norman. He studied cosmic flows and their effects. I had collaborated with him to develop color transfer functions to bring out the morphologies in the astrophysical data. The scientific goal here of the computation was not to create the look of an astrophysical jet, but rather to understand and get the correct physics in order to predict this natural phenomenon. We entered the jet visualization into the SIGGRAPH 87 film and video show, and were ecstatic when we heard from the chair that we were in the show. Joan Collins assured me that this was the best astrophysical jet they'd seen. SIGGRAPH 87 was really a great year. The astrophysical jet became an icon of computational science. It was the cover of the National Science Foundation report by Bruce McCormick, Tom DeFonte, and Maxine Brown that established visualization as an essential element to scientific computing. It described major technical challenges at the time and how it challenged science and the need for addressing this issue. It opened the door to funding. At the same time, we were working with Kodak scientists, our industrial partners at NCSA, and we were addressing many computational challenges. In collaboration, we designed 3D data-driven computer graphics glyphs, 3D glyphs of plastic injection molding. Our unique design garnered a peer-reviewed paper in the journal Simulation, 1988, and we garnered the cover image. These were the first 3D CG data-driven animated glyphs, and they were published in '88. And this work led to a patent for Kodak. My philosophy was that designing visual metaphors to represent abstract numerical data is like creating hieroglyphics and empowering people to read numerical information. Within the emergent digital arts culture, I drew parallels between scientific visualization and the function of other historical artifacts. The Paleolithic Venus de Willendorf on the left and the computational Venus on the right both represent an attempt to harness and understand and control nature. I composited this image and it was included as part of one of the Pioneers shows curated by Joan Truckenbrod many years later. In the SIGGRAPH 88 education venue, pioneers Judy Brown, Barbara Monsatal, and Steve Cunningham recognized the importance of Renaissance team collaboration. I presented on this topic and helped promote the collaborative approach to teaching computer graphics. We produced a 1988 SIGGRAPH calendar that year, and the Venus on a glass pedestal was the month of October. That was a lot of fun. In June of '88, the interactive image led by DeFonte and Sandine was exhibited at the Chicago Museum of Science and Industry and in the SIGGRAPH Art Show 1988. The artists included Coco Kahn, Alan Rath, Myron Kruger, and I developed the interactive supercomputer art science color maker. This exhibit lived for years at the Boston Computer Museum until the equipment aged and we simply could not make it continue to work at the Computer Museum. The NCSA visualization program assembled a sampler of various research applications taking place at the center. And here is the 1988 electronic theater sample reel from NCSA, or a portion of it. Then, at SIGGRAPH 89 in Boston, NCSA researchers worked with Bob Ellis at Sun Microsystems to do an unprecedented performance and technology demonstration to provide the SIGGRAPH audience with the look and feel of conducting computational science and sharing data visualizations. The commercial internet was not available, And so this demo was a look into the future. AT&T donated a satellite link for 3 performances at the SIGGRAPH reception at the Boston Museum. The link between Champaign-Urbana, Illinois, and the Boston Museum was to show what would be possible with high bandwidth to high performance computing in the future. This had to be one of the most expensive demos ever done at SIGGRAPH. I think it was the equivalent of a $250,000 donation from AT&T. Lauren Hare pre-recorded the Tennessee Senator Al Gore talking about the future of networking, the information superhighway, and this video was played at the beginning of 3 live demo performances. Mike Norman, Larry Smarr, Bob Haber, and I and others tested the tech and prepared all night. Absolutely nothing seemed to work until the first performance the next day on the museum stage. Here's a short clip from the '89 televisualization.
Bob, are you there?
Yes, I am, Larry. Greetings from Illinois.
Great. This is Bob Wilkinson. He's the research scientist. Bob is the research scientist that was the group leader on the 3D thunderstorm that you saw in the film and video show last night. What's really interesting is, Bob, over the last 5 years that you and I have been working on this with a lot of other people, just to see the transformation of the way that we do science in this country. I mean, as a result of the National Science Foundation initiative, the 5 supercomputer centers now have over 10,000 users in say 200 universities that are linking from their desktop computers across the NSF net to these supercomputer facilities like you see here in our machine room.
This type of networked and streaming interaction with supercomputing and clouds are ubiquitous today. However, it was a glimpse into the future and another first at SIGGRAPH. To help contextualize these technoscience cultural transformations, I wrote The Tao of Postmodernism, Computer Art, Scientific Visualization, and Other Paradoxes. I introduced the idea of simulacra of scientific visualizations and a paradox for the traditional arts. It was published in 1989 as a supplemental Leonardo issue. In the 80s, computer graphics went mainstream. For example, when Robert Abel's Sexy Robot was shown as part of a '85 Super Bowl. By 1989, the traditional National Geographic magazine printed its first digital images from the expanding computer graphics field. The Venus Digital Art and Astrophysical Jet were included with these first digital images in National Geographic. The Venus series was also on the cover of many publications that spanned science and art. In the mid-'80s, Arnold Beckman donated the Beckman Institute at the University of Illinois, and NCSA took over several floors. Within this institute, I garnered a classroom and convinced Jim Clark, founder of Silicon Graphics, to donate a lab of 20 SGI Iris personal computers for the interdisciplinary education in the classroom. The lab hosted many classes and research, and my class collaboratively created animation shorts. Chris Landreth is shown in the background here. In EDUCOM, I published the Renaissance Teen concept as an educational method for classroom teaching. We created short films like Venus and Milo and Garbage. Students and collaborators in the lab included Mark Alano, Chris Landreth, and Robin Barger, and NCSA staff member Bob Patterson. Our class entered and showed Venus and Milo at SIGGRAPH 90 and later Nicograph. Chris Robin were among others to head to SIGGRAPH in a bus, and it broke down on the return. But it was the beginning of many long-term friendships. The Renaissance educational approach was noticed by EDUCOM, the organizing committee, and they asked me to be the first woman keynote speaker at the time. I was the opening act for former President Jimmy Carter. Other keynote speakers included Steve Jobs at the time at Next and Robert Allen. EDUCOM themed the conference around the Renaissance. During this time, the NSF was funding an academic network that would become the basis for the commercial network today. The NSF net was nascent, but there were no data-driven visualizations to show how it worked. So Rich Hirsch, NSF program manager, approached us to create a data visualization. Bob Patterson and I manually collected data and designed the 3D backbone and subsidiary connections, and animated the first data-driven visualization of the internet, beginning the first one in about 1991. Today, the internet is much more complex, too complex to visualize. However, the NSFNet became an icon of networking, and the visual helped many organizations to get on the map and to garner funding for establishing a network connection. Here we show the NSFNet in the CAVE virtual environment. Bob and I collaborated with EVL grad student Marcus Tiebo to create a voice-driven camera choreography system called Virtual Director. We developed remote collaborative avatars to collaborate among remote locations, like between the cave, power walls, workstations, and immersive desks. We eventually replaced our cave and power wall with passive stereo technologies. But here you show the interaction. Vroom 1994 in Chicago, when Maxine Brown was chair of the conference, installed caves and applications such as Virtual Director for demonstrations. The Vroom was sold out all the time, people standing in line to experience these new VR room-sized experiences. At NCSA in the early days, we taught a class on avatar design for remote collaboration. Well, people could create their own avatars and remotely interact. Bob, Marcus, and I primarily designed Virtual Director to create virtual camera paths with voice control and interactive wand tracking. We designed paths through representations of numerical scientific data, and this was very useful for making cinematic movies of large-scale science. We used Virtual Director to choreograph two major scenes in Cosmic Voyage 1995 IMAX movie. Motorola Foundation, NCSA's industrial partner, helped fund this Smithsonian production. I convinced stakeholders that we could use real scientific data in the film, and we set a precedent in giant screen movies to use cinematic computational science. I became the movie co-producer for scientific visualization and worked with Lauren Carpenter at Pixar on a few scenes for the production. Cosmic Voyage, which was nominated for an Academy Award a year later, in 1995 was nominated. And we attended the 1996 Red Carpet event, Bob Patterson and I, with the director, producer, and family. It was an amazing time, and I'd attended the Red Carpet event the year before as well. After the making of Cosmic Voyage, Bob, Marcus, and I patented Virtual Director as a virtual reality system for steering scientific visualizations. 1997. At the end of the 20th century, Bob Stuart Levy and I, from the Virtual Director Group, began to collaborate with Carter Emmart at the American Museum of Natural History in New York City during the building of their first big digital full dome at the Hayden Planetarium. We collaborated on their millennial opening show, Passport to the Universe, narrated by Tom Hanks, premiering New Year's Eve in the Hayden Planetarium at the Rose Center. We created scientific visualizations for their new digital projection system, and it opened to the public in year 2000. On the second AMNH show, The Search for Life, we collaborated over the internet from NCSA's cave in Urbana, Illinois, to the dome in New York City, where we installed Virtual Director on their Silicon graphics system. We designed camera paths through shared data while Carter and others viewed the results in the dome in New York City. And this was the first of these types of digital dome-to-dome interactions that have now become much more popular. We continue to collaborate remotely with museums, including the Adler Planetarium. Shown here, we fly and create scenes from our 4K theater in Champaign-Urbana to Adler's Mini Dome in Chicago. We witnessed an enormous expansion in high-performance computing into the 2000s that enabled much more detail in science. In a decade working with Wilkinson's team, we were able to compute and visualize the tornado, which was not possible in 1988 with the Anvil Cloud thunderstorm. The tornado was on the cover of the report to the President on Computational Science in Wired magazine and shown at the SIGGRAPH 2005 Electronic Theater. Around this time, we were also experimenting with other technologies as part of a skunkworks project. Tracking technologies were becoming more available, and we wanted to explore attendance at the IEEE Supercomputing Conference. Volunteers carried small RFID tags that communicated with readers on the conference floor. We provided kiosks for volunteers to register for services such as finding friends or retrieving the number of miles walked at the conference. We installed displays throughout the conference showing real-time visualizations of tracking data and interactive applications, including around institutions. On the left, the garden metaphor shows people represented by ants flowing to and from technical sessions and the exhibit hall. Categories of people's interests color the flower petals in each of the locations. We learned then people would share information if they got something in return, like finding their friends or playing games or calculating the mileage they walked. This experiment was 5 years before Fitbit. We also experimented with stereoscopic displays for high-resolution content. We provided 4K stereo movies for Cinegrid and the first JVC 4K 3D theater at CTEC in Japan. And we built and demonstrated various passive stereo environments at Supercomputing, AAAS, and other conferences. We constructed an AVL high-resolution 4K stereo theater in 2009, primarily with the help of Stuart Levy, using state-of-the-art JVC research gear. But beyond displays and other experiments, AVL's unique contribution to the visualization applications community is the cinematic presentation of peer-reviewed, scientifically validated data for the purpose of both science discovery and public presentation, and we call this expository visualization. We work in teams with scientists. We focus on science communication. We test audiences and provide visual context for science data. We help both experts and non-experts understand the complex interactions of natural phenomena. Here's a select sample of AVL science documentary productions since Cosmic Voyage. We've contributed to 12 planetarium shows, 14 television documentaries, 4 IMAX and giant screen films, 7 concert performances, 2 feature films, and many of these visualizations that we have created are featured within immersive public experiences. Most of these giant screen productions have lifespans of more than a decade. The Advanced Visualization Lab is a Renaissance team. The current members are Jeff Carpenter, Bob Patterson, Kalina Borkowitz, Stuart Levy, and AJ Christensen. Alex Betts and Gretchen Hall were major contributors in your early years. I really want to thank my Renaissance team for the work and sampler that you will see here. Thank you, Jeff, for editing all those demo reels together all these years. So I'll just touch on a couple of our IMAX projects here that you see here that we've done. We collaborated with the late Toni Myers, famous for her NASA space films like Blue Planet, and Hubble 3D, narrated by Leonardo DiCaprio, was quite an effort. We designed and rendered over 25% of the length of the film for this film, and it set a precedent in digital to analog conversion of scientific data visualizations. It's been translated into many languages and is still showing at museums around the globe. We visualized the first stereo 3D data visualizations of Orion Nebula with Space Telescope Science Institute scientists Frank Summers, whom we actually worked with Cosmic Voyage as well. Team member Alex Betts developed a new renderer for the Hubble data, and we presented the work at South by Southwest. Tony Myers and our IMAX team visited Illinois many times to work with Bob and the team to choreograph major scenes and to fly through an enormous amount of data. And we used our 4K 3D theater and virtual director. We also worked with Tony Myers on The Beautiful Planet, a IMAX 3D film narrated by Jennifer Lawrence. We created the opening and closing scenes for this space movie, and it was all digital. We never went to film. On the right, you see Bob, Stuart Levy, AJ Christensen, and I attending the red carpet event in New York City. Full dome shows often have long lifespans due to the fact that museums attract return visitors and will license content for decades. We've had the privilege to collaborate with Tom Lucas of Tom Lucas Productions and Mike Bruno, Spitz Creative Media, a part of Evans and Sutherland, and now COSM. And we've had a privilege of working with them on many co-productions. Black Holes, The Other Side of Infinity, and Dynamic Earth, both narrated by Liam Neeson, have been in long-playing blockbusters for the industry. A special note on solar superstorms. This full-dome documentary, narrated by Benedict Cumberbatch, was partially funded by the National Science Foundation. We tested audiences' understanding of the 10 scientific visualizations, and we tested their understanding of story and context. Our goal was to help educate people about the disastrous effects of solar storms on power grids and satellite communications. And we helped educate legislators as well. We presented Solar Superstorms documentary at the Senate building at the request of the NSF to inform legislators about potential natural disasters to our power and communication and national security. The legislators were about to vote on funding for space weather. The documentary informed and demonstrated the devastating effects of solar storms and what it would have and the consequences to people. Scientists focused on the importance of this research. The funding bill passed in the Senate the following week to fund research on space weather and forecasting. The documentary helped decision makers understand the science, and the bill finally passed in 2018. This documentary has had lasting impact to help garner national funding for research. We premiered The Birth of Planet Earth in 2019 at the Zeiss Planetarium in Berlin. It is also partially funded by the NSF under the Cadence Project. We performed audience testing at the Telus Museum in Cartersville, Georgia. Birth of Planet Earth is a story that takes the audience from a collision of the moon and how the planet was born, and we take them all the way down on the planet to photosynthesis and the birth of life on the planet. We visualized photosynthesis in a chromatophore, and it was shown at the 2019 Electronic Theater at SIGGRAPH. At my keynote presentation for SIGGRAPH Asia 2019, I presented the revolution in mapping with satellites, supercomputers, and data visualization. This was an introduction to the work in progress for our latest full dome documentary, Atlas of a Changing Earth. This project is in collaboration with the National Science Foundation, the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency, Blue Waters Project, Tom Lucas Productions, and Mike Bruno from COSM. Atlas of a Changing Earth will be released this fall. And here are some short clips. First, Himawari data from Japan, and we are going to transition into an in-car climate model comparing year 2000 to 2100, moisture depletion, rising temperatures, year 2000 to 2100, and the melting of ice on the planet, year 2000 to 2100. We processed, analyzed, and removed artifacts from noisy digital elevation maps, processing millions of strips of stereoscopic satellite images, finally rendered in blue waters, showing today's rapid melting glaciers, and final images rendered with Houdini on blue waters, as we put it all together. And we look forward to its release this fall. We've garnered many awards over the years, and we've had a lasting impact on the entire field of giant screen documentaries. We set a precedent for inclusion and the presentation of data-driven science in these early giant screen productions. In 2020, the International Planetarium Society honored us with the Technological Innovation Award. Over the years, we influenced the planetarium technologies and the use of vetted scientific data for public outreach. Our goal has been to bring greater understanding and to communicate science. The IPS has given this award only 8 times since its founding in 1958. This is an honor I share with the AVL. In 2019 SIGGRAPH, you honored me with the Lifetime Achievement Award in Digital Art, and I was inducted into the SIGGRAPH Academy that year, right before COVID. After more than 34 years of participating in SIGGRAPH and working in computer graphics and digital art, I felt humbled and a deep gratitude with the jury and the SIGGRAPH and the IPS awards that they endowed. Thank you. SIGGRAPH 2019 was a pioneer's dream, longtime colleagues, friends, and a family celebration. This is my favorite photo from the event. The awards lunch included Larry Smarr, L.V. Ray Smith, Copper Gilleth, Maxine Brown, the entire AVL team here, Jeff Carpenter, A.J. Christensen are shown, and my daughter Elizabeth, and Kawaguchi, and Sue Gollifer. Donald Greenberg. Bob and I both retire from the University of Illinois this month. It has been an amazing journey, and we appreciate the affiliation and all the good memories. We'll have more time to read now and to network with friends, to do more Tai Chi, art, and music. Thank you for the memories. Thank you, SIGGRAPH, University of Illinois, and the National Center for Supercomputing Applications. And thank you, Pioneers Committee.